Welcome, everyone. I am the magnificent MongoSlade. Today, we're going to talk about Dr. Claude Anderson and PowerNomics, which is uh, our non-wrestling live stream for the week. We're going to discuss this book, as a lot of people are familiar with it, but most people have never heard it and never read it. And to be quite honest, Claude Anderson, despite the fact that quite a few of his ideas have seeped into the mainstream of Black America, he's still not very well known. I know a lot of people saw him on the Breakfast Club a couple of years ago, but it's, he's still not very well known. I know a lot of people saw him on the Breakfast Club a couple. Okay, so I just wanted to check the audio. It's still not a huge knowledge base about Dr. Claude Anderson, and he's spoken of quite often in pretty well in certain circles, but most people again have never actually read what he wrote or what he thinks. And I, of course, did do that. So here's the first thing that we must know is that Dr. Claude Anderson is a doctor of education. So we've already stepped into the the Thomas Sowell race and intellectuals bit, where he's already outside of his area of expertise. So he at one point grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and then he grew up in Detroit. He attended my alma mater, which is Wayne State University, and received a PhD in sociology. He worked, I believe, for Jimmy Carter for a short time as well. And it's there's a lot. Like, I'm not that familiar with his background, but all of this stuff is pretty simple, and you could find it if you looked it up. So he's not a phony baloney doctor. All right, he's just not a doctor of the things that he's talking about here. He's going to be talking about economics, but he's not a doctor of economics, which doesn't always need to be the case, because I don't have an economics degree either. But as we get into this, we should take into account certain things. These are things that I wrote after reading the book, and I read the book months ago. So please forgive me if I leave some things out or if I miss some things up. But Dr. Claude Anderson, number one, he uses a Marxist race framework, which is us versus them, blacks versus whites. Incorrect historical analysis. There's plenty of that, of course, when it comes to the Black intelligentsia. He promotes wealth redistribution. Namely, he's most known for reparations. So that's already wealth redistribution. He's oddly anti-individual. We're going to talk about that. He promotes, of course, the Willie Lynch letter, which, of course, is a conspiracy theory. It's not real. He's anti-communist, also while being a Marxist. Very strange. And he dissed Booker T. Washington while kind of copying some of his ideas. So what do we get if we go into Dr. Claude Anderson's book, PowerNomics? All right. So the entire theory of the book is supposed to be about Black economic empowerment. And if you've ever heard anything about Dr. Claude Anderson, you know his central thesis is group-based economics, that all Black people should work together for the betterment of all other Black people, which I don't necessarily have the most argumentation with. And this comes from page 78. He says, and I'm reading directly from the book, and I'm looking for where did I put? I didn't put like a citation in here. Where did I put it? Where is this thing? Okay, he's talking about other white unity among Germans, Italians, English, Polish, Greeks, and other ethnic groups on racial matters, and black people. New ethnic immigrants are exercising an old assimilation option. Arabs, Asians, Eastern Europeans, and Hispanics are building and maintaining their own ethnic communities. So Dr. Claud Anderson is also one of the guys who was the first to ring the bell about illegal immigration and how immigration is destroying black communities, black neighborhoods, and taking away black jobs and all these sorts of things. So when you see people like a lot of these people who are blacks for Trump, a lot of these people who are like a lot of the I guess you could say the black MAGA of Chicago and of places like Compton, and a lot of these people are informed by Dr. Claud Anderson. On page 77, he says nationalism helps group build communities, mobilize for power and control of resources. It allows cultural groups to function as nations within nations. Black Americans are a nation within a nation, but have never behaved in a manner consistent with this reality. So he believes that there's a black nation within the United States. He later on in the book talks about majority black cities, as he talks about building maroon towns, which are cities or neighborhoods with majority black populations, of which there are already quite a few. He says blacks have sufficient resources to build at least one major maroon town with its own business centers or street malls. Now, this is all a good idea. I think black people should work together, and you should own businesses, you should own the education system, you should do everything that you could possibly do. But he's talking about a lot of these groups who are separated mostly by language and culture. For instance, when he talks about all the different white groups, like the Germans, Italians, etc., they're all separated by language. Blacks are not. Now, when you do have black people who are separated by culture, you get like the Jamaican areas of Brooklyn, right? I think then there's parts of, I think they call Little Africa, which I believe is also in New York. So there are enclaves of ethnic blacks in the United States. They typically move together, live together, similar to the Hispanics and the Asians, etc. But there's a lot of this sort of thing where you use white people as an example, but you don't tell the entire story. You know, Asians work together, sure, but they're subgrouped. The Japanese, the Koreans, and the Chinese all have their own areas, and they all live within their own enclaves. There's just no one big Asian enclave. It doesn't quite work that way. Mostly because when those people come to this country, they don't speak the language fluently. So they live amongst other people who also speak the language. Detroit is notably one of the most diverse cities in the country. We have a Mexican town, and he mentions this when he talks about maroon towns. Is he talks about putting up cultural symbols so that you'll know when you're in a black area. I guess weave on the ground is not what we're looking for here. But I see what he's talking about, because as soon as you get into the majority Mexican areas, all of a sudden the stores are in Spanish. You know, like almost all of the stores are in Spanish. The grocery stores are in Spanish. They have different food in their grocery stores than we have in ours here on the east side and the west side of Detroit. You go to the Arab communities like in Hamtramck or Dearborn, same thing. All the writing is in Arabic. The clothing stores are different. The supermarkets are different, etc. But what's the difference between a black man from Detroit and a black man from Atlanta, let's say? You speak the same language. You eat mostly the same foods. There's no real difference between the two, right? Now, there is a difference between, a Jamaican and a Haitian and a black guy from Detroit. Those things are different. You know, they talk differently, speak different language. A Haitian is more likely to speak French, while Jamaicans may speak patois. They also speak a little bit of broken English from time to time. And they eat differently. They have a completely different diet. They might even have a different religious system, as Haitians often have. I hate to put the voodoo thing out there, but if you follow like Haitian Catholicism, a lot of it is sort of voodoo-ish. And Jamaicans are quite a few of them are Rastafarians, which is not Christians. There are many Christian Jamaicans, but they have a different religion. Most black people in the United States are Baptists for the most part. So the religion is different, the culture is different, the food is different, you talk different. You can't just say black and just, that's already off, okay? You're not doing a smart thing here. Now, the delineation argument is something that you probably hear from the Tariq Nasheed side of the internet, that you need to have the ADOS, the what is that called? The American Descendants of Slaves, right? And therefore, you will have a competitive and aggressive relationship with Jamaicans and Haitians and Ghanaians and Nigerians. Not that none of that is necessary. The FBAs too. ADOS and the FBAs are the same thing. Okay, so you saw that start to kick in. I think it might have been the early 2010s, where you started seeing it in colleges and universities, where black immigrants from other countries, mainly Nigerians, were coming over to the United States, and then you would have black Americans kind of boycotting them getting scholarships because these things are supposed to be for black Americans. A lot of that stuff happened under Obama. So yeah, I remember this whole ADOS, FBA. It's the same thing. You know, they're playing a marketing game, trying to see who gets credit for what, but it's the same thing. Okay. Yvette Brown her name is Yvette Brown, right? I don't know, is it or is it Yvette something else? I know her first name is Yvette. She's crazy. In any event, so once you start talking about group-based economics and you're talking about ethnic minorities and ethnic groups, are you putting blacks in Detroit and from Chicago and from Baltimore, and those cities are different, by the way? Are you putting them in the same boat with Haitians and Jamaicans? Because it's not the same. Immigrants versus non-immigrants, that's completely different. So different experience, different levels of education, different education system, different work ethic. Yvette Carnell, that was my second guess. Yeah, okay. I knew her first name was Yvette. But that's already a problem. Now, you want to have maroon towns. Well, these things already existed. There were already many black towns founded by black people. This was in the 1800s, early 1900s. For instance, there was Chubbtown, and I believe it was Georgia, that was founded by a couple of black brothers. You even had, who was the author, the young lady who wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God? Fuck, her name right on the tip of my tongue. But her father was the mayor of a black town. So she had a completely different upbringing, and she learned a lot of the stuff that she learned about race from traveling around. But her father was one of the mayors of a black town. So there were already many black towns. There have been majority black towns. Detroit is a majority black town. Washington, D.C. is a majority black town. Baltimore is a majority black town. For a long time, Oakland was a majority black town. New Orleans, for a long time, was a majority black town. Houston, there's just so many that are already from what he's talking about. And of course, there's almost entirely black neighborhoods within these black towns, or majority black towns. The issue here is that oftentimes, and this is kind of where I sort of agree with him, is you see a lot of the far leftists, they'll say that this stuff is, caused by redlining, and is caused by, what's the word I'm looking for? redlining. It was something else. Segregation, redlining and segregation. Without realizing that sometimes people self-segregate. You know, sometimes black people move in, white people move out. That's just what they want. I don't see a problem with that. Whenever people talk about white flight or something like that, I don't get too upset about it. Because if you don't, why deal with racism if you don't want to? You know, if you think all white people are racist anyway, then why do you care if they leave? So a lot of the maroon towns and things like that he's talking about, these things already existed. So and it hasn't turned up a lot of greatness. Now it has some. There's always going to be great individuals in these towns. But he's not talking about individuals because he doesn't believe in individualism. Now let's talk about that for a second, because this is a huge problem with me. Is he doesn't think individualism is a good thing. He says white society credits Anglo-Saxon rugged individualism with development of this nation. This is page 101. He says individualism in schools is a form of educational Darwinism, of survival of the fittest and brightest. It is a form of selfishness that encourages a child to be self-centered, to outdo and profit at the expense of another child. This is the same ideology that drives this nation's political and economic systems from which black people have systemically been excluded. If black children are going to successfully compete, they will have to experience countervailing education practices that play to the strengths of black people as a community. What does that even mean, right? That play to the strengths of black people as a community. Communities are made of individuals. There's no such thing as individualism. Everybody's not 6'4". All right. I mean, by definition, you have to agree that individualism exists. And individualism means that some people are going to do better than others. You cannot have everybody rises and falls by their weakest link. And they're not going to rise and fall by their strongest link. They're going to rise and fall by their weakest link. That's how groups function. On a football team, if the defense sucks, then the other team can score a lot of points. And it doesn't mean how good your offense is. If the defense sucks and the other team scores more points, they win. If your offense sucks, then it doesn't matter how good your defense is, because your offense can't score. Right? So you are going to look at what your weakest elements are. And once you understand that a group's weakest elements are always going to be inner city people, because the inner city is going to be a mass collection of some people who are mediocre to pretty damn good, but large masses of people who are very poor, uneducated, undereducated, laborers, etc., etc. And it's not necessarily going to work out that way, because sometimes you can train your weakest links into being stronger. But what do you do when you have large groups of people who are, let's say, mentally ill or physically disabled or whatever? Like, this thing doesn't make sense. Now, individually, people can do quite well. And then you can help other people individually. You can help members of your family. You can help friends that you've known for a long time, and you can help them raise their value and raise their families, and you can build communities around that. But you can't save everybody. Everybody can't fit on the boat. All right. That's the first thing people got to recognize. This is why group-based economics does not work. You're always going to be judged by the weakest link. And if your people and sometimes people are a weak link and they don't even know it. I was just thinking about this before, but there are not broke people as much as there are broke people habits, right? spending money that you don't have, spending money on things that you don't need, but that you want. You know, you can't save everybody. So some people might be smart in terms of they're highly educated, they have a good work ethic, but they have broke nigga habits. You know, they spend more money on weed and they ain't got no money for food. They're irresponsible with cash. They're dumb with their penises or their vaginas or whatever, and they have babies out of wedlock or, you know, whatever the case may be. Is the group responsible for these people, or are these people responsible for themselves? Now, he would say that the group is responsible for these people. Okay, so what do we do with these people if they choose not to really help matters? Well, he's got a great answer for this. He calls it a code of conduct. This is from page, I believe, 74. I'm going to have to go and find it. All right, so he says code of conduct and group accountability. A code of conduct is a standard of behavior that outlines what is right and wrong within and outside of that community. It serves as a competitive tool that promotes group unity and accountability by suggesting either rewards or punishments for its members based upon how their acts help or hurt the members of the group. Okay, so who is going to decide what is in the Black Code of Conduct? Is it going to be like a vote? Am I going to get to vote? Because I'm going to vote against weave. I'm going to vote against weed. Okay. I'm going to vote against tattoos. I'm going to vote against, you know, quite a few things that y'all might not like. Y'all don't want my opinion of, you know, codes of conduct. As somebody who used to wear jeans and, you know, I didn't sag a lot, you know, but I would vote against sagging. Unkempt facial hair. There's a lot of things that I would vote against if I had an opportunity to vote on what you should be doing. All these women who got these nose rings, I'll be voting against that. No black women with nose rings. You look like a bull. No. All those extra long fingernails, I'm voting against that. All that Cardi B shit you got at the end of your hands, I'm voting against that. And then you want to get serious. You really want to get serious. Gay shit, voting against that. Okay, you're not pushing the black people forward by being gay, being trans. I'm voting against that. You don't want me in that group. Like, I'm not the person you want, you know, making decisions about your life. This is why you need to be an individual. Because you may think I'm crazy. You may say, like, this guy, he don't want me to eat pork chops. No, I don't want you to eat pork chops. And guess what? The Nation of Islam don't want you to eat pork chops either. So if I get together with the Nation of Islam, all this Cardi B shit, all these twerk videos, all this kind of stuff, you guys are done for. And then what? You gonna rebel? Yeah, right. Forget that. But let's say somebody does decide to rebel. He says a code of conduct must effectively discourage Sambo behavior that was once known as Uncle Tomism. This kind of behavior is extremely detrimental to community building. It is nearly impossible to eliminate because dominant society rushes to reward it. Samboism is a means of social control that extends all the way back to slavery. The majority society has always needed a few blacks who would sell out their race for their own personal gain. The practice of Samboism has continued for more than a century after slavery ended because there is not a prescribed code of conduct that either forbids it or imposes consequences to those who engage in it as a means of selling out their race. So, we've seen this sort of stuff. Chrisette Michele, you know, she got hit with the Samboism, right? She performed at Donald Trump's first inauguration. They destroyed her career for that. They see what happened with Nelly and Snoop Dogg in the most recent Donald Trump inauguration. What happened to Kanye West in between the two? Kanye West, the same guy that, the internet called a genius for years and years. CNN went out there, had black people say, well, this is what happens when Negroes don't read. Right? Because everybody has to be on code, whatever that means. Again, who gets to make the code? How is having babies with no father in the house on code? How is that on code? How is you twerking at the rally on code? How is, the way that some black women dress in public, how is that on code? Why are none of these people ever punished and pushed out of society, but they're supported? Well, he would say, well, a Megan Thee Stallion, that would be Samboism. She's a sellout. Well, it seems like she's just being herself. I don't necessarily like it, but I mean, whatever. Do I think it's good for young girls? No. Again, I'd be voting against that kind of stuff. If I got to vote on the Black Code of Conduct, I'd vote against it. But I don't get a vote. She's an individual. She's going to do her thing, and the parents have to guard their children from people like Megan Thee Stallion. If you don't do that, I'm sorry, your child's going to be in the wasteland. Always be serious, though, where you see a lot of black people promote things that they don't do themselves. To me, this is the worst part of it. All these incredibly rich black socialists all of a sudden. These people who, like, Michael Eric Dyson, who runs to the defense of, black people who are doing incredibly detrimental things. He runs to their defense. And you're like, why? Why are you defending, these guys who are thieves? And, people used to make fun of the black names, right? There was a book called Is Bill Cosby Right? I used to have this book. I don't know what happened to it. Maybe it got wet. Maybe I gave it away. I gave away a lot of books. I give away books all the time. And in the book, he was talking about people making fun of black names. The Shaniquas and the Keishas and all this kind of stuff. And he was going to try to explain it. And he said something like the Shah in these names, like Keisha, Shaniqua, all this kind of stuff. It was your black African roots, because there was like Shah is a root word for God or something like that. These niggas don't know that, man. You just making shit up. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't if somebody were to tell you that, like, oh yeah, I named my daughter X, Y, and Z because we come from this country, or I looked it up in a book or something like that, then okay. But if you just made it up on your own, this girl don't know what Shaniqua means. She doesn't. None of this. She don't know what any of that stuff means. She just thought it was cute, and people started making fun of it. That's really all it is. It's not that deep. It's like they used to say twerking was like some kind of African dance, and it is an African dance. I think it's called. I forget what it's called, but there was an African dance that looks a lot like twerking. But the people who were twerking didn't know anything about that when they was doing it. Just get real with that shit. But he's talking about creating a code of conduct, so you can punish Uncle Tomism. So what are the kind of punishments we should be talking about? He says the consequences for Samboism can vary from social sanctions to economic penalties. He says, in some cities, black activists, community organizations posted pictures of Sambos on yard signs and billboards. Others publicly issued Sambo certificates and Hayward Shepherd Awards. The punishment for violating code and behavior standards must be sure and swift. It is important that every member of the community understands that the community will enforce the code and protect itself. Unreal. Sambo certificates. Public humiliation. That's what, when they give you the Charlemagne the God, when they give you the donkey of the day, right? Was it Tariq Nasheed or whatever? They give away these Uncle Tom awards or something like that. See, here's the thing though. You never actually give these things to people who are detrimental to black folks. You actually give them to people who just disagree with you. Thomas Sowell is an Uncle Tom. Highly educated black man who has no twerk videos to speak of. He disagrees with you on things like economics, but he's an Uncle Tom. Same thing with Clarence Thomas. Perfectly responsible black man, no outside children, don't have any felonies for drugs and all that kind of shit, but he's an Uncle Tom. How? Well, he doesn't go along with our majority black bullshit. So, you mean to tell me that if somebody sells cocaine in your neighborhood, that's okay as long as politically he don't stand against you? He can go to prison. He can rape. He can rob. He can steal. He can do whatever he wants as long as his politics are the same as yours. How is that on code? I'm voting against everything I just said. If I get to vote on the code of conduct, man, I'm voting against it. No bullshit. Y'all would hate to live under MongoSlade's black code of conduct. Y'all would hate it. I just happen to do these things for myself. I don't force them upon everybody else. And I don't think they're, horrible ideas, So we already know that listening to this guy, he's already off his rocker, right? And he says that individualism is the reason why blacks are underachieving. Page 72. Social integration co-opted blacks into practicing individualism rather than group solidarity and group competitiveness. Individualism is the perfect ideological weapon to defend the group privilege that each generation of whites inherits over blacks. Individualism gives what appears to be a reasonable explanation for black underachievement. Let's talk about these group economics again, because the mob does not let in non-Italians, right? The mob says you got to be Italian. They'll do business with you or whatever, but you got to be Italian, otherwise you're not a member, right? Nope, got to be Italian. So how do whites work together? The whites are not really working with other white people because they're white. They may work with other Italians because they're Italians. And they may want to look, they have, this thing in common. And blacks should look after other black people because they have that thing in common. But it's not the only thing, because the mob has killed scores of Italians. A lot of Italians. The people who kill whites the most are whites. Again, this is poor historical context. The whole idea of whites working together, where did that come from? Even when you talk about this country, there have been Dutch and Spanish and English and French people killing each other over this country. I live in Detroit. The French founded colonies in this area. They went to war with the Indians, and they also went to war with the British. Where do you get the ideas that the white people were just, hey, your skin looks like mine, we should be friends? No, where the fuck that come from? That came way, way later. And then even when they did that, they didn't include the Italians and the Irish. That again came way, way later. But the idea that blacks are underachieving because of individualism, there's no evidence for this. And there's no argument made that I can see here about why this would be true. How can it be that Blacks are underachieving due to individualism. How could that be? Because we've seen communists like the Black Panthers get together. They didn't uplift anybody. They had all the group solidarity in the world. They were fucking communists. And the only thing they really achieved was getting people shot and getting people put in prison. The Black Panthers was a criminal gang. They had some good ideas in terms of social programs. They didn't have any money, so quite often they had to steal. They had to rob, or they had to go to their Jewish patrons to get money. And I use the word Jewish specifically for a reason. Because it was proven that at least in New York, when Afeni Shakur went to prison with the rest of the Panther 21, that rich Jews in New York helped her get out. That was a fact. It was also, I believe, in Chicago with Jeff Fort and all these guys who were gangbanging in Chicago. They were given money by the federal government. That was proven. New York also, when they did the clinic, I forget what it's called. They did a clinic in, I think, Harlem or something like that. They were given $1 million by the government. They burnt all through it because they're communists. They're not interested in building anything. They're interested in destruction and agitation propaganda. Okay? The Black Panthers was around for a decade or more. They achieved nothing. Not one fucking thing. And there was over 100 of them in each city in the United States. So not just total. And some of these people were college educated. But almost none of them were educated in anything that has to do with economics. Because again, they were all communists. And they didn't build a fucking thing. Now, some of them did end up in politics. So it's not like the free lunch program was the only thing that they did. Some of them won, like Bobby Rush. I think he ended up in Congress. Some of them won local seats and stuff like that. But mostly they ended up being, the ones that survived, ended up being touring lecturers. And they ended up being like the vanguard of the left. They didn't build anything. And they had plenty of money and time to. They spent most of their money bailing people out of prison and trying to create free programs with no money. So the idea that it was individualism that was holding Black people back is incorrect. It's the belief that you have to save everybody that has been holding people back. Because it has been forcing people who could on their own do quite well and to abandon their own benefit because it doesn't benefit the group. But then they fall in with the wrong group, and that person just takes advantage of them, or those people just take advantage of them. Good example. I like using popular examples. Somebody like MC Hammer, right? MC Hammer on his own made millions of dollars. He thought it was his job to save everybody. He ended up going broke. Instead of saying, look, I can't take care of everybody. Look at the mass amounts of football players and basketball players that go broke because they got to buy their mama a house, got to buy their daddy a house, got to get little brother a house, got to get him a car. And next thing you know, all your money is gone. Because you were thinking, I got to do this for everybody else. I can't be selfish and hold on to it for myself. And then you got nothing. I just saw Clarissa Shields crying about this on a short the other day. She was talking about how she does all this stuff for her family and they still hate her. Guess what? People are not pets. They do tend to, over time, become resentful if they're in debt to you. You know, if they keep having to come to you to get something, eventually they're going to have some level of resentment for you. But the idea that there should be some kind of group-based system is like, each man has to learn how to control his own economic future. And some of us are going to be tied together because we're business partners, we're best friends, we're brothers. But not everybody is not going to be able to do that. You got to be able to cut off fingers to save the hand. So he says, when first generation black millionaires, this is WG Phil, says, try to buy their family a house and cars, do they realize they have to pay bills, repairs? Most of them don't. And they also don't realize quite often, especially in sports, that the income that they make is short term. Like musicians and athletes, a lot of them don't realize that money is short term. Meaning that if you play running back in the NFL, you can make a whole lot of money, but your career is going to be very short. Either going to get cut due to injury, or you're just going to get too old. Because there's new football players every single year. So if you tear up your knees when you're 22, you're not likely to be worth anything at 30. So that means you're talking about being retired. So all the money that you made 22, 23, 24, you better still have it, or put the fries in the bag. And nobody cares once you're not on the field anymore, which is why the NFL had to beg ESPN to retrain some of these athletes like Shannon Sharp and Michael Irvin to go on TV and be analysts. And some of them are actually good. Some of them suck. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. But that's what the sports leagues did. They realized a lot of these guys were going broke. So they had to get the big sports channels like Fox and all of them to retrain some of these athletes. So we understand that this guy has got this going for him. So he wants to build a culture. Let's see, 35, page 35. He wants to talk about building a black culture. He says culture usually refers to the systems and norms of behavior and shared values that are passed on from one generation to another. Okay, that's true. That's very much true. And he talks about Eurocentric culture. This is page 36. Incorporates the Horatio Alger myth of ethnic success and individualism. The myth asserts that the individuals who are hardworking and who live exemplary, pious lives can always achieve and move up the economic and social ladder. I don't know about the always. I don't know about the word always. But most of the time, yes, if you live an exemplary life, and you don't necessarily need to be pious, that's not always going to be the case. But if you're special at something and you find a way to monetize what you're good at, usually you'll be fine. And again, that's an individual thing. Not everybody's an artist. Not everybody's an athlete. Not everybody's a genius. Okay? Not everybody's a math virtuoso or something. Not everybody's good with science. You have to find out what you're good at. That's the whole thing about individualism. You have to believe in yourself. And you have to do an honest appraisal of what you can do. Instead of trying to do jobs that the group thinks that you need to know how to do. Like the Freedmen's Bank. You put a bunch of people who don't know fuck all about banking and say, well, here's some money in a bank. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. Of course it's not going to turn out right. That was embarrassing. I remember reading about the Freedmen's Bank when I was a kid, man. I haven't read into it like recently, but it was pretty stupid. So he he says the white culture script justifies the racial exclusion, exploitation, and abuse of black people as the official outgroup. Those justifications are transmitted through negative images of blacks that are embedded in the larger culture as well as black American culture. These images devalue black culture and in effect script blacks against themselves. I don't even know what that means, man. You know, if you're black, you're automatically in the out group anyway because you look different. But if white people can see beyond race, which they often do, then you'll be fine if you have the same values. Not everybody looks at people and decides what their culture is and what they are and who they are by what they look like. So here is his idea of black culture. He says black people's culture must psychologically and emotionally elevate them and give them grounds to be a confident and proud people. I already have a problem with that. It should promote the ethic that blacks are a very special people. Special people is bolded. Blacks are the original people on the earth. In this country, they are the only non-immigrants. Blacks should be proud of and promote the fact that they have a natural talent for generating music, dance, and language. They have extraordinary emotional and physical strength that took them through 300 years of slavery and Jim Crow and allows them to dominate in nearly all the sports they are allowed to enter. Black slaves were noted for their ability to perform hard work. Blacks should adopt and inculcate a hard work ethic into their empowerment culture. Prior to their enslavement, blacks were a strong communal society that believed in the concept and value of an extended family. There's so many bolded terms in here. Black Americans have made the most spectacular educational achievements on earth. Okay? He says after 300 years of slavery and forced illiteracy, they reduced their illiteracy rate by half within 30 years. You know, he disses Booker T. Washington in his book. Okay, we're going to talk about that. Maybe we get there eventually. But blacks are the original people on earth. Okay, that's straight from the Nation of Islam. Now, there's a lot of ideas in here, like the black nationalism that he talks about, that he gets from Nation of Islam, but he also gets it from Marcus Garvey, because that's where Nation of Islam got it. All right. So clearly, he has one of these "they came before Columbus" thought processes, and I don't want to debate that. There were black people here in the 1500s. They came over with the Spanish. All right. That was before the first settlement of Jamestown and all that kind of stuff. But they weren't like here. They came over with the Spanish. Right. So there's evidence that there were some black people at least had been to the what we call now the United States or the Americas way back in the 1500s, which of course would mean that there was black people in Mexico because again, Spain, right? And the Spanish pretty much dominate southern United States and Mexico. Well, parts of the southern United States, specifically like Florida, right? So you came before Columbus. You're a very special people. You have a natural talent for generating music, dance, and language. I mean, get real, right? You are the blues people. This is the Leroy Jones blues people, right? You're the natural blues people. Get real. The value of extended family. This would mean cousins, uncles, etc. But everybody has this. Everybody has a hard work ethic and a strong communal society and a value of extended family. That's not unique to black people. It's not unique to black Americans. It's not unique to Haitians. It's not unique to Jamaicans. Not unique to Africans. It's not unique to Italians. It's not unique to the Irish. It's not unique to anybody. It's just called family. You have close bonds with people that you grew up with, who took care of you. You take care of them when they get older. People who are bound by blood. So him borrowing ideas from the Nation of Islam, who cares? I like some Nation of Islam ideas. I like some of the Marcus Garvey ideas too. So he talks about having a group vision. We talked about this too, but I want to read his version of it. He says, quote, the PowerNomics group vision is crafted to do a number of things. First, it is called the PowerNomics vision, to lock into Black America's mind a concept that defines the solution of our racial predicament. We need economic power. This newly coined phrase and vision will keep us from wandering back into the pursuit of limited social goals. Okay, I actually like that. Secondly, this vision is very specific. It tells us what we are seeking: political and economic self-sufficiency and competitiveness. That needs to be underlined, because he is focused on the competitive part and not the self-sufficient part. Any acts or issues that do not result in greater ownership and control of economic and political resources for Black Americans do not fit the PowerNomics template and should be given a low priority. And then he, of course, he starts talking about setting a group vision and a group timetable of 2005, which, of course, was 20 years ago, and none of this shit happened, right? But he wants Black people to be economically self-sufficient and economically competitive with whites and other groups. And this is where he takes his shot at Booker T. Washington. Now, Booker T. Washington is dislike the individualism argument. I know that people are full of shit when I see how they attack Booker T. Washington, and if they dismiss individualism. Like, we already talked about this guy being a Marxist, all right? So it is what it is. He's probably not a socialist, but he's most certainly a Marxist. He's not talking about the government controlling anything. He's talking about group-based control of markets, and none of that stuff makes sense. So he talks about Booker T. Washington a couple of times in the book. He says, a PowerNomics vocational and industrial education curriculum can be very different in purpose than the vocational education instituted by Booker T. Washington in the 1800s. Washington's program trained Black students for subordinate roles and jobs for which most instances there were no markets. Black children should now be educated for jobs in Black-owned businesses, as well as for jobs where Black people are in authority. So that should tell you right there, he's getting somewhere with Booker T. Washington. So then he continues on page 188. Booker T. Washington was a pro-Black leader. Washington's greatest weakness was his dream of being, quote, the great accommodator between Blacks and whites. He destroyed Black people's hopes of being an independent and competitive people by telling whites at the Atlanta Fair in 1896 that Blacks were, quote, the most patient, faithful, law-abiding, and unresentful people that the world had ever seen. The white society rewarded Washington and Black Americans for their humble, meek, compassionate, and non-competitive attitudes by subjecting them to another 60 years of Jim Crow semi-slavery. So, he's another one of these people who thinks that Booker T. Washington was an accommodator. Now, one of the first things you have to do, and I'm going to break out a Booker T. Washington book about on this, because Booker T. Washington is a guy I have to absolutely stand up for, is you have to realize this guy is writing this book in 2001. Booker T. Washington died in 1919. All right? You had 100 years, right? Like, you had almost 100 years between what Booker T. Washington was writing and what he was thinking and his ideas, and what you're writing and your ideas. In that time, anything could have occurred. But Booker T. Washington wrote a book called My Larger Education. And in this book, which was largely Booker T. Washington taking shots at W.E.B. Du Bois without mentioning his name, which was even funnier. It was like quite good actually. That he took a lot of shots at W.B. Du Bois in his book without saying his name. He talks a lot about what he learns from the various blacks and whites that he meets. Okay, so he talked about being a Negro in the United States has its advantages and its disadvantages. He talked about some of the difficulties that black people are facing. He talks about successful men having to gain strength of mind and clearness of vision. Okay, so there's a lot of things in here. So what are we talking about in terms of his 1896 statement, which of course was also criticized by W.E.B. Du Bois. So I'm trying to find, where did I put the... Okay, so he wrote on page 62. He had an issue with the talented 10th, as they called themselves. He says, I had expressed in my Atlanta speech, this is Booker T. Washington, soon brought me into conflict with a small group of colored people who sometimes styled themselves the intellectuals, at other times the talented 10th. As most of these men were graduates of northern colleges and made their homes for the most part in the North, it was natural enough, I suppose, that they should feel that leadership in all race matters should remain, heretofore, in the North. At any rate, they were opposed to any change from the policy of non-compromising and relentless antagonism to the South, so long as there seemed to them to be anything in Southern conditions wrong or unjust to the Negro. Now, this is actually Claud Anderson, because Claud Anderson, he has a YouTube channel, and I recently watched a video where he talked about how the Southern whites are still the most racist people in the country, and how they are traitors and they attacked America twice and all this kind of stuff. So what he's talking about is the talented 10th, the same people that Dr. Claud Anderson probably would have felt pretty good hanging around. And Booker T. Washington talked a lot about, hey, the South has its own unique culture. It has its own unique situation, own unique way of dealing with the race issue. The Southern blacks should deal with, whites in the South. You should deal with whites in the North, essentially. So he says the first thing to which they objected was my plan for the industrial education of the Negro. It seemed to them that in teaching colored people to work with the hands, I was making too great a concession to public opinion in the South. Some of them thought, probably, that I did not really believe in industrial education myself. But in any case, they were opposed to any, quote, concession, no matter whether industrial education was good or bad. According to their way of looking at the matter, the Southern white man was a natural enemy of the Negro, and any attempt, no matter for what purpose, to gain his sympathy or support must be regarded as a kind of treason to the race. All these matters furnished fruitful subjects for controversy, in all of which the college graduates that I have referred to, naturally the leaders. The first thing that which a young man was tempted to do after leaving college was, it seems, to start out on a lecturing tour, traveling about from town to town to another for the purpose of discussing what are known as race subjects. And he tells a story about, basically a useless black intellectual that had to be retrained in some kind of hard, not I want to say hard sciences, but like industrial work, so that he could take care of himself. And basically, this is what he was saying about blacks, is that they need to learn how to take care of themselves. And he said quite often, quite many times actually, that showing that blacks could take care of themselves will actually get rid of a lot of the racial bitterness and a lot of the racial problems that Black people have. So this is from page 15 of My Larger Education. He says, where do I meet this? He says, one thing which gave me faith at the outset and increased my confidence as I went on was the insight which I gained into the actual relations of the races in the South. I observed, in the first place, that as a result of 250 years of slavery, the two races have become bound together in intimate ways that people outside the South could not understand, and of which the white people and colored people themselves were perhaps not fully conscious. More than that, I perceived that the two races needed each other, and that for many years to come, no other laboring class of people would be able to fill the place occupied by the Negro in the life of the Southern white man. I saw also one change that had been brought about as a result of freedom, a change which many Southern white men had, it seemed to me, failed to see. As long as slavery existed, the white man, for his own protection, and in order to keep the Negro contented with his condition of servitude, was compelled to keep him in ignorance. In freedom, however, just the reverse condition exists. Now the white man is not only free to assist the Negro in his effort to rise, but he has every motive of self-interest to do so, since the uplift and education of the Negro would reduce the number of paupers and criminals of the race and increase the number and efficiency of its skilled laborers. Again, he mentions the word laborer, right? He's talking about working. And mostly people are talking about working for white people. But if you actually read the rest of the book, he's talking about Black people who own schools, Black people are going into industries, all these sorts of things, right? Negro newspapers, etc., etc. But you have to start somewhere, which is kind of his point, right? You got to start somewhere. And this is 1919. Booker T. Washington was born in slavery. So when you're talking about somebody who was born in slavery and is trying to say, hey, you know, we were stuck together in this way. The South is different than the North. You know, we're not going to, constant race agitation is not going to work in the South. What will work, however, is if Blacks become self-sufficient, we become educated, and we can learn how to take care of ourselves. And white people will be free to help us if they desired. But we have to actually get to work. And then once you get to work, you become a master of, you know, whatever it is you're doing. You can go into business for yourself. And as we start talking about schools and things. So taking a shot at Booker T. Washington. Meanwhile, you're talking about building educational systems, education reform. It's one of the subjects that he talks about. And I'm talking about Claud Anderson now. Now we're going back to PowerNomics. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. It's already going on long enough. I'm trying to look for when he was talking about education. He's talking about funding. He's talking about corporations and the white government and all this kind of stuff. So he says, how does a community get control of its schools? Many majority Black urban areas provide instructive case studies in the types of problems Blacks will encounter as they seek more control over their schools. Starts talking about Detroit in the 1960s, the local control of the schools. And he says Detroit is leading a change in this direction, white control of Black schools and their students. Detroit is a Black majority community with a Black student body, Black mayor, Black dominated city council, and an elected Black school board. I hate to break it to him, but this is Detroit in 2025, and let me tell you, a lot of kids cannot read. I don't think it should matter what color these people are. The outcome is garbage. The outcome is not working. The outcome did not work. All right. So he's talking about blacks should control more of these institutions, which would be nice if these black people were qualified to control these institutions, but they are not. So when you talk about education, he's also talking about what should black people do. All right. And I think he says in here, black colleges. All right. And he's talking about black colleges and what black colleges should do. He says black colleges were not built to educate, quote, all the children of all the people. They came into existence to educate black people, to equip them to be a competitive group. Well, guess who controlled these? Who created a black university, a black institute to smarten up the people? The same guy you said was a white accommodator. Again, he's not thinking. He says from emancipation until the black civil rights movement, ex-black slaves sold wood, flowers, pies, and ice on the streets to generate enough money to acquire land, buildings, equipment, and materials to sustain a network of black colleges. Black colleges were commissioned to take uneducated blacks and teach them to be doctors, nurses, teachers, and other professionals. We must reclaim our black colleges and return them to their former glory and mission. I don't necessarily have a problem with this. I think if they have to exist, they should serve some kind of purpose, right? But what he wants blacks to do with these colleges and universities is to teach them reparations. He says black colleges, this is page 113, black colleges should put our best scholarly minds to work on the question of the best way to organize a reparations movement and to develop a formula to calculate benefits. How much are black people entitled to? What are the justifications? They should be teaching black students to take up intelligent political roles based on a clear understanding of our historical challenges and predicament, to develop public policies and accountability systems that help all blacks. Black colleges could publish advisory boards as a mechanism for input from business, political, and community leaders. See, look, you're going to create black colleges, and then you're going to tell them to go figure out reparations. Brother, you need to figure out how to get a bank, how to find funding sources, how to raise money, how to find, and, now black communities don't even have supermarkets. And this dude is talking about you should use your best black minds to form about reparations. A giveaway from the government, a giveaway from an institution or something like that. Not the universities should educate people on how to best monetize how to make themselves and further their individual achievements and things of that sort. It's all about the group. So we're going to waste everybody's intellectual abilities on reparations. Okay, it's a horrible waste of time. Just truly egregious waste of time. So, holy hell. Let's get into this. So what does he want to do? He talked earlier about group-based economics. He wants to do reparations. But so he lays out his plan. Okay? He talks about laying out a plan. So he says, the social achievements of the Black Civil Rights Movement are not without merit. It did help Black Americans socially, but hamstrung Blacks economically. By 1, diverting an economic issue to its social and political goals. 2, making Black people consumers instead of producers. Okay, look, again, I agree with this, but then you want to use all of our best Black minds on reparations. Reparations is not production. It's wealth redistribution. Moving on. 3, focusing on the inequality of income rather than of wealth. That's a good point. 4, encouraging them to be job seekers rather than job producers. Again, another good point. 5, espousing altruism for the world rather than group interest. I would actually argue that we don't need to have any sort of altruism for the world. And you do need to focus on self-interest, not group self-interest. 6, ignoring public policies that made blacks impoverished guests in America. So he talks about black leadership having a choice that, and he talks about all these different things that we should get into if we're going to have a plan. We got to have a plan, y'all. And what is our plan? I'm trying to find. Did I put a? I don't think I put. Did I put a pin in where to? I don't see where I put these things in here. Now he does talk about industry and all these things later on in the book, but it's like way in the back. Okay, he's talking about group politics and stuff like this too. So he's not completely ignoring the fact that you do have to have industry, but that's where your best black mind should go, is into the industry and not into wealth redistribution policy and wealth redistribution plans. But here I did take notes. It says the plan, it says to create an alternative economy, 2, dominate ownership and management of businesses in black majority areas. 3, wealth building, a focus on restoring of the quote economic intent of the civil rights law or civil rights movement. 4, step branding. And 5, establish root businesses. Now, root businesses are, if I remember correctly, like some of these industries he's talking about in the book. I probably should have took more detailed notes, but I didn't. So too bad for me. But he does talk about in the book manufacturing, processing and assembly, that sort of stuff. All of which makes perfect sense, and to which I don't disagree with any of it. But how we got here is through forced group-based economics, Marxist us versus them shit, poor historical analysis, etc., etc. Overall, I don't think that Claude Anderson is like one of the worst people that have ever written books about economics. He's clearly a Marxist. He clearly believes in wealth redistribution, but he understands the necessity of industry and of building your own, which is a major, major difference between him and a lot of other black intellectuals who are all about finding ways to get more money from the government. He's about getting money from the government. You know, he's not going to turn down that check, as Martin Luther King said. But his primary goal is to create a system of black economic independence, which, if you tell me, like, I just want to build black economic independence, I will say, okay, great. Because I could just eliminate the word black and just say economic independence in general, and that's the same for everybody, and that works for everybody. To not be dependent on, you know, maybe people will be dependent on a job, but to not be dependent too much on other groups of people, other individuals, because, you know, if your life or your survival comes into conflict with theirs, they're going to choose their own over you anyway. And that's another reason why you can't have group-based issues, because I worked for a black business owner, and when it was losing him money, the fact that he had a mostly black workforce did not matter to him, not one fucking bit. What mattered to him was that his business was on the verge of going under, and he was paying people too much. At least in his mind, he felt like he was. Now, again, Claude Anderson is not one of the worst. You know, he's not as bad as, you know, Francis Cress Welsing. He's not as bad as some of the other ones. But he clearly has that strongly Marxist educational background, and he has some grasp of history. He has some grasp of how things can benefit people. But when you start talking about group-based codes of conduct, when you start talking about, reparations, when you start dissing cultural leaders, like when he supported W.B. Du Bois, for God's sake, which is very strange. But I mean, it is what it is. W.B. Du Bois created nothing. Well, I guess he helped create the NAACP, but that hasn't done that much for Black people. Not recently. Maybe in its lifetime, it's done something for Black people, but not recently. But that's Dr. Claud Anderson, PowerNomics. Let's go through the comment section, and then we can wrap this thing up. I didn't expect to talk about this long. Eye of the Watcher, who has been very active here, says that is one of the places Dr. Anderson lost me at. I guess what were we talking about? Hard work under duress. Yeah. So he says the thing with Dr. Anderson, he took out a loan from a Black bank and defaulted. I didn't even know about that. I just know he's kind of an obscure character now. He's still pretty well known in certain parts of the internet, but he's not, one of those people that is front and center, one of the people that is quoted most often in Black political spaces. And a lot of that is because he's not a socialist. He has socialist tendencies, like many of them do, including Marcus Garvey and the Nation of Islam. But ultimately, he wants to build a people who are economically independent, which ultimately is a really good goal. Maybe he's a little extreme on some of those other things, but it's a worthy enough goal. So, Eye of the Watcher says, look at the Soul City project in North Carolina and the Haiti district of North Carolina. It is not like what he's describing have not been tried. Yeah, Soul City was a whole thing. For those of you who don't know, they were going to create a Black city in North Carolina called Soul City. It never really got off the ground. I think they built a logo and they built a banner, but they didn't build much else. This was in the 70s, where they were going to build Soul City. But again, there were Black towns created long before Soul City. There were Black towns built in the 1800s, 1900s, etc. These things are not new. He's not bringing like new arguments to the forefront here. So he's a little behind on, we need to have our own Black cities. It's like, well, when he wrote that book, there were plenty of towns that were already mostly Black. Not 100%, but they were mostly Black. Says Dr. Anderson wants to recreate what he saw in his childhood in North Carolina, but he leaves out he was sheltered from racism by his parents. Really, you think so? I think he said his family owned businesses down there, and his family did pretty well, from my understanding. He says, you are right. You can't save everyone. Some people don't want to be saved. And some people don't want to put forth the effort of saving themselves. They expect you to do it. And those are usually the people who are the biggest on group-based stuff, because they want somebody else to work hard on the group project and they just reap the benefits. And that's unfair to the person who was doing the building. And the person who was doing the building should be able to reap some level of reward from what they're doing and control who takes over when they're gone. And this is how, small businesses work. If your dad spent 50 years building a deli in a neighborhood, he gets to decide that his son gets it, his grandson will get it, his best friend who worked with him at the deli for 30 years gets it, or something like that. If it's a private corporation, he doesn't get that choice, to dabble in pro wrestling. Vince McMahon couldn't make his daughter the CEO. She had to be made the CEO by the board of directors. If WWE was owned by Vince McMahon completely and was a private company, he could have left it to whoever he wanted to, you know. But most people see that there's money in private industry or public industry, let's say. So that means public corporations, and therefore you lose control over who gets to be in the ownership. But most businesses should be private businesses and should be small local businesses. That way you have more control over the market and what you're doing, who you're hiring, etc. One of the biggest, most terrible things that the government has done is taken local control out of the hands of the owners and essentially giving it to the government, whether it's the local government, federal government, or whatever. Now you really don't even control who works in these shops anymore. And people like the Arabs and stuff who own like the grocery stores and the gas stations around here, many of them are related to people, but they're pretty smart about what they're doing. But there's other people who catch on. Like there's black people who have been boycotting stores in my very neighborhood because the owners were Arab, and the Arab owners hold black people to certain standards, like not stealing, and that becomes a big issue. But you got to have local ownership. You got to have personal ownership of things. This group-based ownership and stuff like this is not going to work. It's not going to work long term. He says Dr. Anderson never implemented any of his ideas on a small scale. You would think that he would have created like a co-op or something like that to further these goals, right? I mean, he's got a small little cult following. I don't know how small it is. Dr. Boyce Watkins has been, one of this guy's sidekicks for years and years. They've been essentially like what Michael Larry Dyson was to Cornel West. That is what Dr. Boyce Watkins is to Dr. Claud Anderson. He gives him all the praise in the world. He talks about him all the time. They do podcasts together and stuff now. Boyce Watkins is not my favorite. Not my favorite. He's got a finance degree and yet somehow has whiffed on economics quite often. Also weaves into Marxism. But whatever. You said Eric Dyson was just making up stuff to sell books. A lot of those so-called black names were old European names. A lot of them were also modifications of other people's names or other names or other words that they heard. Like the Nevaeh thing that everybody had going on, the heaven backwards thing, the Samaj, which is James spelled backwards, that kind of gimmick. There was a lot of stuff like that going on. Gozu94 says, then explain why there's a Russian chick named Natasha. It's not about, see, that's the weird thing, right? When you try to make up shit, it doesn't always come out right. That's why I was like, man, Michael Larry Dyson is a piece of work. He's a piece. I wish I had that book. Maybe I ought to find it. He said Eric Dyson keeps sexually harassing women. He also uses his position as a pastor to have sex with his parishioners. He was man enough to admit that he was doing that. I wish he hadn't done it. He says it was the Bama of the week in DMV with Huggy Lowdown. Tariq Nasheed did the Coon Awards. Yeah, like see these sorts of awards, these Sambo, public humiliation awards. They never go to people who actually, are in causing black people to be in distress. Because who is the Sambo really? Nelly for performing at, the inauguration, or some of these guys who are telling that really, really fat ass rapper, what's his name, Dave Blunt, who is like, drinking codeine and is like 600 pounds. He looks like a goddamn fool. And that's not a coon. He's not a Sambo. Knowing that There have been plenty of really, really, really fat rappers like himself who have drank themselves to death with that codeine stuff. And the fact that black children are still drinking that shit, that's not cooning. Telling people to do drugs is not cooning. Hey, go destroy your brain cells and, get addicted to whatever. Whenever I see that stuff, it's almost always because they did some kind of social faux pas. It's never because you're a coon because you defrauded the black community, you were a scammer, or you had a bunch of babies out of wedlock. How is Nick Cannon not a coon? How many children does he have that don't have a father in the household? How is that not cooning? Because I think he said he's a black Hebrew Israelite or some such nonsense because he believes in polygamy, or whatever it is. Like, even in a polygamous society, the father would still be in the home. You have multiple children by multiple different women, and you can only be in one place at one time. Your influence on your children is limited. How are you not a coon? How is that not Samboism? You're destroying your children. Unless you believe you don't have any effect on your children at all. That would be the only option you would have there. It's pretty stupid. He said Eye of the Watcher says the NFL and the NBA have financial classes that they have to go to, but a lot of them don't pay attention to the information given. That was also one of the things that was enforced after the Broke documentary came out. See, Sports Illustrated did an article called "Why Athletes Go Broke," and then ESPN followed it up with a documentary called "Broke." Shortly thereafter, the NFL and the NBA put all this financial literacy shit into contracts and all that because they were getting embarrassed by the number of athletes that were going broke after they got retired, and they were in the NBA and the NFL were being blamed for it, even though it wasn't their fault. The players are irresponsible with money. They're supposed to be college educated, but many of them are just athletes. They know fuck all about money or anything else. They just went to college because they were tall or because they were strong, and that was it. And then they guilt tripped the NFL and the NBA into putting these financial literacy courses into their contracts, and then some of them still don't go, or they go, they don't pay attention. So it's all about trying to make other people responsible for you. That's been a huge problem that we have here. We keep trying to make businesses and corporations more responsible for people. This is where we get 401ks, unions. It's your job's responsibility to make sure you have health insurance. It's your job's responsibility to make sure you have a retirement fund. It's the government's responsibility. It's always somebody else's responsibility to take care of you. But I'm supposed to hitch my wagon to these people who don't want to take responsibility for even themselves? Well, y'all are a group, man. All y'all look the same. Get the fuck out of here. The word I was looking for was not gentrification. It was the gentrification means that whites are moving in. It was white flight. I mean, whites moving out. You said the new age grimace. Talking about that guy, Dave Blunt. He's huge, man. He's massive. I wish him all the best. I hope he doesn't end up like Big Mo and the rest of those really, really fat rappers and stuff. All right. Thank you guys for dropping by. I appreciate it. I would suggest if you're interested in the book, read it, and let me know what you think. If you've already read it, and you think I'm wrong about Dr. Claud Anderson, you can talk to me about it in the Discord, and I'll talk to you guys later.